how about things like things that you have no control over? For example, the growth in traffic on Amazon.
Mhm.
Do you ever take those into account?
Those are things that we pay attention to, but are very difficult to forecast. We look at the macro environment or even the demands of a specific category and think about, is this on the increase or is this on the decline? Um, but and those are things will factor in, but ultimately they're things that are very difficult to, we're not in control of those things. And so that those environmental factors are things we study about the recent past to tell, okay, are there more or fewer people who searched for camp chairs on Amazon last month than the same month in the previous year? Because that gives us a lot of context into did the market grow or shrink uh,
Yeah.
at a very granular level. Um, but I don't have a good way of projecting what those things will be doing in the future, and so that would be a great thing to incorporate.
Yeah. Um, what about things like, for example, you may not have sold in certain months and historically because the item became unavailable.
Mhm.
So how do you incorporate those into the model?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a big reason why we have that static annual forecast. I think a lot of people might think, "Oh, static, that's a lot of work," and that's true. It is a lot of work. But also they think, "Oh, it must go out of date," and it does. But the great thing you can do when you just have a spreadsheet and you say, "Oh, what should I expect to sell in May?" You say, "Oh, last year, I only sold 10 units in May, but I sold 50 in April. That doesn't make much sense. What happened? Oh, we were out of stock. Okay, maybe instead of using last year's sales numbers to establish my curve, I should interpolate what would have happened if we hadn't had those issues." Now, we also come in at the end and give a plug for a standard out of stock rate and lost buy box rate, because we've never had 100% in stock and 100% buy box rates in any year. So we don't expect that with our forecast, because that would be a great way to buy too much inventory all the time. But we don't assume that just because we were out of stock last year in May that we will be out of stock next year. So that's really where the static forecasts save us from just copying forward mistakes of the past.
So the other one is the buy box. So
Mhm.
if you're not in the buy box 100% of the time,
Right.
that's another factor. So of course that implies that you are tracking your buy box rate already. If you're
Yes.
not, you really should. So,
Yeah, you really
but
should.
let's assume that you are tracking your buy box rate. How do you factor that into the calculation?
Mhm. Um, that's one where I'm doing that in our performance analyses of the past to tell me, did we have a major buy box issue? If it was 3%, 5% lost buy box, a lot of times when the lost buy box numbers are that small, um, we can't even attribute it to another seller. Like Keepa won't have seen another seller. We've never seen another seller, so we just attribute it to a bit of noisiness in the data. But if there was a big issue in the past, then we'll back it all the way out, because we don't assume that we'll have a similar issue in the future unless there's some strange scenario where we can anticipate that. Um, and then at the end of projecting out each month, we'll add a small plug for each month, because again, we know we'll lose the buy box a small percentage of the time. So with those long-term production plans, we want to factor in a little bit of lost buy box.
Yeah. So, I mean, the question is, why would you lose the buy box? Because you are the owner of the listing. So,
Yeah.
uh, so because you don't have to necessarily lose the buy box. If you are losing it because something unanticipated happened, and you can take action and gain the buy box back immediately, right?
Yeah, it really depends on what sort of business you're running. If you're a private label seller who only sells on Amazon or through direct to consumer channels, it should be very rare that you're losing the buy box, and that lost buy box might just be an artifact of a suspension or an out of stock or some other issue that wasn't related to some other seller beating you in the buy box. But with other types of businesses, resellers in particular, you're probably
Oh,
dealing with lots of lost buy box. But
yeah.
with the brands we work with, they're distributed worldwide in bricks and mortar. And so you can run into issues where brands aren't fully controlling the flow of their goods. We're dealing with an issue today where one of our a 3P seller appeared with quite a bit of inventory of one of our brands, and it's still being researched, but it seems like they bought some from a foreign distributor, moved it to the US because they saw an opportunity to win some buy box, and they are. So
Yeah.
it really depends on the type of business you're running and how much control you have over the flow of goods. So I don't believe brands should be selling on Amazon if they have very little control over their flow of goods. They should seek to gain control over that first, or else things like forecasting your inventory will be very difficult. But if you do have a high level of control, even if it's not 100% control, then there can still be issues from time to time, and that's what we see. So global distribution can be one. Your retailers, maybe you have agreements with them that say you can't sell on Amazon, but sometimes they do and ask for forgiveness later. And sometimes retailers need to solve their own inventory issues and they liquidate stock to whoever will buy it. And inventory will make its way into the resale market that way.
So, when I was a seller, I was a reseller. So buy box, so projecting how many pieces I could sell in order to issue POs, that was key for me. And of course, it's a much harder proposition to project your inventory as a reseller. So if
Yes.
you get trained in that, then you can pretty much do the other one easier. But still, there are other things.